we need not think alike to love alike. And yet, despite the importance of intellectual diversity which we profess, the reality is that we tend to be more of a like-minded group than we realize. A recent survey showed that 84% of Unitarian Universalists identify as Democrats. A plurality identify theologically as religious humanists, and we have one of the highest rates of religious groups of people having a college education. If we were to do a survey about a variety of hot-button issues, the reality is that most of us would have a similar viewpoint because we share common assumptions and have similar values. Despite these shared values and convictions, today's sermon about ethical non-monogamy is going to be an area that I don't expect us all to agree on. It's one of the privileges of preaching in a Unitarian Universalist church that this is a free pulpit, and what the preacher speaks about isn't something we all have to completely agree on. We simply agree to support each other in our search for truth. My hope is that this sermon will open people's minds to new information and to help people better understand why we do things the way that we do them. Now, in our society, the general template for long-term romantic relationships are that they follow a monogamous pattern. As the wedding ritual most of us are familiar with says, will you have this man or woman to be your husband or wife, to live together in the covenant of marriage? Will you love him or her, comfort him or her, honor and keep him or her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, be faithful to him or her as long as you both shall live? The bride or groom then respond, I do. Even in an age when serial monogamy seems to be the practical norm, we nevertheless organize ourselves around the principle that long-term relationships are between two people who intend to be with one another until one or the other dies, to the exclusion of others. The alternative to this is non-monogamy. The expressions of non-monogamy that we are probably most familiar with include cheating, where one or both partners engage in sexual behavior outside of the relationship without the knowledge or consent of the other partner, or polygamy, when one man is married to multiple women, or swinging, in which committed opposite-sex couples exchange partners for explicitly sexual purposes. In our culture, cheating is universally reviled, while polygamy seems either foreign or cultish, and swinging tends to have a lurid and licentious connotation to it. Having said that, there are other versions of non-monogamy which include open relationships, in which a primary couple who are committed to one another consensually agree to be open to contact with others, in which the third or additional partner's involvement or role in the relationship is secondary to the primary partner's. Another variation is called monogamous. A couple whose monogamous is primarily monogamous, however, fluctuating degrees of sexual contact with others is permitted under certain circumstances, subject to specific rules limiting the frequency or type of outside contact, or limiting the time and location of those contacts. Yet another form of non-monogamy is called polyamory. In polyamorous relationships, both partners are open to having multiple romantic and or erotic relationships simultaneously with the knowledge and consent of all involved. Polyamory is different from polygamy because the partners involved could be of any gender, all of the partners are equal to one another, and attraction and commitment among the partners may flow between all the partners involved, not just between a husband and his multiple wives who are not romantically connected to one another. A variation on polyamory is called polyfidelity, in which a group of 3 or more people agree to practice romantic and sexual fidelity within their intimate group. A version of this is creatively labeled with the name throuple, a portmanteau of the words three and couple. And finally, another version of non-monogamy is what's being called relationship anarchy, or RA for short. In relationship anarchy, specific distinctions between or hierarchical valuations of friendships versus love-based relationships are eliminated, so that love or erotic-based relationships are no more valuable than platonic relationships. Each relationship, however conceived, is unique and can evolve as the participants would like it to. If a conflict arises, the people involved deal with the issue, or the relationship comes to an end. RA works off of the assumption that whereas love is an abundant resource, people can have as many concurrent, meaningful, and loving relationships as they would like that are not limited to the couple format. So having described the multitude of possible relationship structures that exist, one may wonder, how did we in 2018 arrive with such a plethora of possible relationship options? What are the origins of these types of relationship formats? When did one size fits all monogamy not become enough? For starters, I can recall the seemingly endless debates about same-sex marriage that took place in the past 2 decades throughout society, and especially by religious groups. People who were against changing the law or allowing such unions in their houses of worship usually claimed that the biblical definition of marriage was what we should follow, and that the nuclear family as we know it has primeval origins. Of course, what was strange about that argument is that there really is no such thing as a biblical definition of marriage. Adam and Eve were in a monogamous union, but neither did they have additional options, being the only 2 Homo sapiens in existence in that story. Abraham was married to his half-sister Sarah and had a child with Sarah's maid Hagar. Jacob was married to Rachel and Leah and had children with 2 additional concubines named Zilpah and Bilhah. King David was linked to Michal, Abigail, and Bathsheba. His son King Solomon is recorded as having 700 wives and 300 concubines. Jesus of Nazareth, on the other hand, never was married, and St. Paul was celibate. The biblical case for our modern notion of marriage is quite shaky. And the anthropological and historical version is just as complex. In their best-selling book, Sex at Dawn, The Prehistoric Origins of Human Sexuality, co-authors Christopher Ryan and Casilda Jetha write about how prior to the year 8000 BCE, when humans switched from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural societies, sexuality tended to be far less possessive. Prior to the advent of agriculture, people were living in small foraging groups where most things were shared, including food, childcare, shelter, and defense. Sexual interactions in that period strengthened the bond of trust within the group. Rather than causing jealousy, playful sexual interactions strengthened social equilibrium and reciprocal obligation, much in the same way as has been observed in our primate relatives, the bonobos. After the advent of agriculture, people's lifestyle changed dramatically, leading to the emergence of private property and the accumulation of power. Paternity became more important since fathers would only want to take care of offspring who were their own and to whom they could pass on their inheritance. This changed the way people behaved and left the modern human being in a situation where pair-bonded monogamy made more sense, even while our instincts were at odds with the society that was emerging. So having looked to the past in evolutionary, historical, and biblical sources, and with some knowledge of the plethora of options people opt for in the current landscape, what does ethical non-monogamy actually look like in practice in the real world? The idea for today's sermon on ethical non-monogamy originated partly from a long-standing interest in the varieties of human pair bonding, but also more recently from the clinical work I've been doing at my other job. As many of you know, I started a new position in March as the clinical coordinator at a research center affiliated with Hunter College, whose focus is on HIV, substance use, sexual behavior, and mental health. Most of the research that I've been involved with is having to do with studies about gay couples. Some of the couples come in to participate in a study involving what is called CHTC, or Couples HIV Testing and Counseling. And the research we gather helps us learn about how to better address the needs of men in same-sex relationships. Some of the couples are enrolled in a study that helps them to gain information about pre-exposure prophylaxis treatment for HIV, addresses their recreational drug use, and to improve interpersonal communication as a couple. Some of the couples are enrolled in a study that focuses just on HIV prevention and ongoing substance use. While all of these studies are somewhat similar, each of them gives us an opportunity to meet gay or bisexual men who are in committed relationships, who practice some form of non-monogamy, who have engaged in some form of recreational or chronic substance use, and who may be in a relationship with both partners are either HIV negative or one is HIV negative and one is HIV positive. None of the factors I mentioned defines the entirety of the people's personality. And when you meet these research participants, you notice that any of them could be the guy next door. They come from all over the city. They have a variety of career histories and aspirations. Many moved from across the country to live in New York. They overcame many obstacles to build a life for themselves, and they have a range of personal interests and passions. In terms of their sexual behavior, I have found them to all be very conscientious and deliberate in the choices they make about their lives. While part of our work in the interventions is to help them to articulate what their sexual agreement is as a couple, I often find that this is something that they've been very thoughtful about working out as a couple even before we discuss the issue. I get the sense that in these men's relationships, nothing is taken for granted, everything is up for discussion, that each person aims to maximize his own autonomy and pleasure while also respecting the primacy of the relationship itself and the emotions of the person's other half. I have met couples who have very few or no rules about what is considered permissible outside of the relationship. And I have met couples who have very clear and specific guidelines about what and how often each person is allowed to do outside of the relationship. Clear, non-defensive, honest communication seems to be the thing all these couples have in common. Being able to authentically communicate about what you want and what you feel in a way that is straightforward, mutual, and expressive, while also reflecting and listening to what the other partner says, are skills we teach our participants, but which many already practice in some way in their relationship. What I've learned from meeting and studying these research participants is that while love and sex might not be the same thing for them, that their commitment and devotion to one another and the flexibility they have in their relationship are both valued. In fact, when we meet research participants, it's usually in the protocol to do what we call a personal values card sort, in which the person or couple goes through a stack of cards with various values listed on them. And we ask that the cards be sorted into piles based on level of importance. While our non-monogamous couples tend to select values like independence, adventure, or pleasure, this is also balanced by their selection of values like commitment, safety, responsibility, acceptance, love, and growth. Even though their way of organizing their relationship may be different from mainstream society, they nevertheless aim to live by their values in a way that they feel strengthens their primary relationship. As Unitarian Universalists, we too seek to live out our values and to follow our conscience as best we can in our daily living. For some UUs, this means living out their intimate relationships in an ethically non-monogamous manner. Our denomination is the only mainstream religious movement which has shown support for polyamory and ethical non-monogamy. In 2014, the General Assembly passed an amendment to the Unitarian Universalist Association non-discrimination statement, which included the insertion of the phrase family and relationship structures, in addition to the usual race, sex, sexual orientation, and so forth. This means that a person who wants to work for a UUA institution or even enter the UU ministry cannot be discriminated against simply because the person espouses a polyamorous way of life. There is also an organization called the UUPA, which stands for Unitarian Universalist for Polyamory Awareness, whose mission is to provide support, promote education, and encourage spiritual wholeness within the UUA and the community of polyamorous identified individuals and families within and beyond our congregations. More specifically, they aim to encourage respect, honesty, consensuality, commitment, mutuality, justice, pleasure, and love in all of our relationships, to celebrate the goodness of creation, including our bodies and our sexuality, and to promote recognition that sexuality is central to our humanity and integral to our spirituality. Whatever kind of intimate relationship structure one may be in or hope to be in, I believe that these aims that UUPA promote are ones we could all endorse. As practitioners of our liberal religion, we are not only free to pursue the types of relationships that make most sense to us, but we also have the responsibility to be conscientious about our intentions, about how we treat those we are with, and about how our actions represent ourselves and our values to the wider world we are interconnected with. My intentions in this sermon today are not to convince anyone that polyamorous relationships are superior to monogamous ones, or even that we should amend our civil laws to accommodate alternative family and relationship structures. Rather, my hope is that we as a community of faith would have a greater awareness and acceptance of those whose carefully considered relational expressions are different from our own. And also that just as I do with my research participants, that we would consider what values we most want to cultivate in our intimate relationships. As a community rooted in the spirit and ethic of love, may that same love radiate outwards, not only to our intimate partners, but to the world at large.